I was organizing quarterly tax documents when my phone buzzed with Mom's ringtone. Her voice trembled. Through the speaker, barely controlled panic bleeding through each syllable. "There's been an accident," she whispered, and my stomach dropped to the concrete floor of my office building. "Your car, Raymond? Jake was driving your Honda when it happened on the mountain highway." The silence stretched between us like a chasm before her next words shattered my world completely. "You're still insured, right?" The question hit me like a physical blow because I had no idea my car had even left my apartment complex parking space. My hands shook as I grabbed my jacket and briefcase from the desk. The accounting firm buzzed with typical Thursday afternoon energy, but everything felt surreal as I rushed past concerned coworkers toward the elevator. The ride down seemed endless, my mind racing with questions that had no good answers. How had Jake gotten my car? Why hadn't anyone asked me? The 20-minute drive to Highway 285 felt like hours, my rental car struggling against mountain winds that seemed determined to push me back. The accident scene sprawled across both lanes like a nightmare come to life. Emergency vehicles created a kaleidoscope of flashing lights against the gray November sky. Police officers directed traffic around twisted metal that had once been my pride and joy. My brand new Honda Civic lay upside down in the drainage ditch, its roof completely crushed, windows shattered into diamond fragments that caught the afternoon sunlight. Steam rose from the mangled engine compartment, and I could smell coolant mixing with mountain air. Officer Martinez approached me with practiced sympathy etched across his weathered face. "You the owner?" he asked, consulting his clipboard with methodical precision. I nodded, unable to form words as I stared at the destruction. The vehicle rolled 3 times. After hitting that patch of black ice, he explained, pointing to skid marks that zigzagged across the asphalt. Driver and passenger were transported to Denver General. The passenger, a young woman named Angela, sustained serious injuries, broken ribs, possible internal bleeding. Jake sat on the ambulance bumper, his head wrapped in white gauze that was already stained with dried blood. His left arm hung in a temporary sling, and his jeans were torn at both knees. When he saw me approaching, something shifted in his expression from pain to defiance. His dark eyes held no remorse, no acknowledgement of what he'd done to my life in a single afternoon. "Hey, Raymond," he called out, with casual indifference that made my chest tighten. "Sorry about your ride, man. But hey, that's what insurance is for, right?" His cavalier attitude sent rage coursing through my veins like electricity. This wasn't some minor fender bender in a parking lot. This was my entire financial future, wrapped around a guardrail. The paramedic treating Jake stepped aside, allowing me to get closer to my cousin. The smell of alcohol hit me immediately, sharp and unmistakable, even outdoors. Empty beer cans lay scattered around the wreckage, their silver surfaces glinting like evidence of betrayal. Miller Lite labels were clearly visible, and I counted at least 6 containers that had been thrown from the vehicle during its violent tumbling. Officer Martinez followed my gaze to the beer cans and made another note on his clipboard. "Blood alcohol test came back .12, he said quietly. "Legal limits .08. Your cousin was significantly impaired when this happened." The words felt like ice water in my stomach because I knew exactly what that meant for my insurance coverage. Uncle Martin and Aunt Carol arrived in their blue pickup truck, faces grim with worry that transformed into hostility the moment they spotted me. Carol rushed to Jake's side, fussing over his bandages while shooting accusatory glances in my direction. Martin stood with arms crossed, his massive frame blocking my view of the wreckage, as if protecting Jake from my judgment. "This wouldn't have happened if your car had better tires," Martin declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being believed without question. "Jake told us the brakes felt squishy too. You should have maintained that vehicle properly before letting family borrow it." The accusation hung in the mountain air like smoke from a campfire, impossible to escape. My parents arrived just as the tow truck began loading my destroyed Honda onto its flatbed. Dad walked straight to Uncle Martin and they began discussing the situation in hushed tones that excluded me entirely. Mom approached with tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands wringing together in the nervous habit I'd known since childhood. "We didn't think you'd mind," she whispered, reaching out to touch my shoulder. "Jake needed transportation for his weekend trip with Angela. They've been planning this romantic getaway for months. Your father and I thought it would be nice to help them out. Families should support each other during difficult times. But you didn't ask me," I replied, my voice cracking with emotion I couldn't contain. "You gave away my car without even telling me. I found out because of an accident report. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial implications, though. Those were devastating enough." Insurance adjuster. Patricia Williams arrived as the last emergency vehicles departed. Her professional demeanor provided no comfort as she surveyed the wreckage with calculating eyes. Silver hair pulled back in a tight-bun navy business suit that looked out of place against the mountain scenery. She took photographs from multiple angles, documenting every detail of the destruction. "Mr. Thompson," she said, consulting her tablet computer with methodical efficiency, "I need to inform you about coverage limitations regarding alcohol-related incidents. Your policy specifically excludes claims where the driver's blood alcohol content exceeds legal limits. This means we'll be denying your comprehensive claim entirely." The words hit like physical blows, each syllable driving home the reality of my situation. No payout for the totaled vehicle, no coverage for Angela's medical expenses, no assistance with Jake's injuries. I would be responsible for the remaining $12,000 on my auto loan for a car that no longer existed, except as twisted metal in a junkyard. Jake's family gathered around him like protective wolves, their voices rising in animated discussion about weather conditions and vehicle maintenance. Nobody acknowledged his drinking. Nobody mentioned his responsibility. Instead, they built a narrative where external forces had conspired against an innocent victim. "Your cousin mentioned that Angela might need extensive medical treatment." Patricia continued, her voice carefully neutral. "There could be lawsuits involved, especially if permanent disabilities result from her injuries. I'd recommend contacting a personal injury attorney as soon as possible to protect yourself." The mountain wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine trees and distant snow. My destroyed Honda disappeared around a curve on the back of the tow truck, taking with it 6 months of car payments and years of careful credit building. I stood alone on the highway shoulder, watching my family comfort my cousin, while my entire financial life crumbled around me like autumn leaves. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had always been a sacred tradition, but walking through their front door felt like entering hostile territory. The familiar aroma of Mom's pot roast couldn't mask the tension that crackled through the dining room like electricity before a thunderstorm. Dad carved the meat with mechanical precision. While everyone avoided eye contact, the silence broken only by the scraping of serving spoons against ceramic dishes. Amanda, my younger sister, finally broke the uncomfortable quiet. "You're being really selfish about this whole car thing, Raymond," she announced, her voice carrying the righteous indignation of someone who'd never made a car payment in her life. "Jake could have been killed, and all you care about is money and insurance claims." Her words stung because part of me wondered if she might be right. But $12,000 wasn't just money to me. It represented months of overtime at the accounting firm, weekends spent doing freelance tax preparation instead of relaxing every small sacrifice I'd made to build something resembling financial independence. Dad set down the carving knife and looked directly at me for the first time since I'd arrived. "Son, family comes first. Always has, always will. Jake needed transportation for an important trip, and we had access to a vehicle that was just sitting in your parking space. I don't understand why you're making such a big production out of this whole situation." "But it wasn't your decision to make," I replied, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "You took my car without permission. You didn't even tell me it was gone. I found out because of a phone call about an accident." Mom's eyes filled with tears as she passed the green bean casserole around the table. We've always shared everything in this family, Raymond. When you needed help with college tuition, we gave it. When you wanted to move into that apartment, we co-signed your lease. This is just how families work. We support each other. Grandmother Betty sat quietly in the corner, her arthritic fingers picking at her dinner roll. She'd moved in with my parents after Grandpa died, but lately she seemed more fragile, more confused about everyday details. Still, her blue eyes remained sharp as she watched the family drama unfold around the mahogany table. The conversation was interrupted by Mom's phone buzzing against the tablecloth. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "It's a text message from Jake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He wants to know if Raymond is going to cooperate with the insurance investigation." "Let me see that," I demanded, reaching across the table. But Mom clutched the phone protectively against her chest, shaking her head with surprising firmness. "Some things are private, Raymond. Family business stays within the family." Something about her defensive reaction triggered my suspicion. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead slipped into the kitchen where Mom had left her purse on the granite countertop. Her phone lay beside it, still unlocked from checking the message. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her text history with Jake. The conversation went back weeks, filled with detailed planning for Jake's mountain trip. But what made my blood run cold were the messages about his driving record. Mom had written, "Raymond doesn't know about your license situation, right? We should probably keep that between us for now." Jake's response was equally damning. "Don't worry, Aunt Susan. I'll be extra careful. Besides, it's only suspended for 6 more months. What Raymond doesn't know won't hurt him." Suspended license. They'd given my car to someone who wasn't legally allowed to drive. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined possible, because it revealed premeditation planning, a deliberate decision to deceive me about something that could have destroyed my life. I took screenshots of the conversation and returned to the dining room where the family continued eating as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed for me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision motivated by family loyalty. This was a calculated conspiracy that had put my financial future at risk. "Jake has a suspended license," I announced to the table, my voice cutting through the casual chatter like a blade. Mom knew it. Dad probably knew it too. But nobody thought to mention that little detail before handing over my keys. The silence that followed was deafening. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Dad's face reddened with anger that seemed directed at me rather than at the situation itself. "How dare you go through your mother's phone?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's a violation of privacy." "Privacy," I repeated, standing up so quickly that my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "You're talking to me about privacy after secretly giving my car to someone who can't legally drive. After lying to me for weeks about your plans. After putting me at risk for lawsuits and financial ruin." Amanda jumped to their defense immediately. "You're being paranoid, Raymond. Jake's a good driver. One little mistake with paperwork doesn't mean anything. Besides, the accident was caused by weather conditions, not driver error. You should be grateful that everyone survived." But Grandmother Betty spoke up from her corner chair, her voice carrying the weight of 8 decades. "I've been wondering about something," she said quietly, her fingers trembling slightly as she set down her water glass. "Money's been disappearing from my savings account. Little amounts at first, then bigger chunks. I've been meaning to ask about it." The room went completely silent except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. Dad's face went ashen, and Mom began clearing plates with nervous energy that seemed designed to distract from the conversation. "What kind of money, Grandma?" I asked, gently kneeling beside her chair. "How much are we talking about?" "Started about 6 months ago," she replied, her memory clearly sharper than everyone had assumed. "First, it was $200 here, $300 there. Bank statements showed withdrawals I never made. Thought I was getting forgetful at first, but then last month someone took 2,000 in one day. Uncle Martin's pickup truck pulled into the driveway during this revelation, followed by Jake's beat-up Mustang. Through the window, I could see Aunt Carol helping Jake out of the passenger seat, his arm still in the sling from the accident. They walked up to the front door with the confidence of people who expected warm welcomes and family support. Dad opened the door before they could knock, greeting his brother with a hearty hug that seemed forced under the circumstances. Jake limped into the dining room, his face still showing bruises from the crash, but his attitude remained as defiant as ever. "Hope you're not still mad about the car, Raymond," he said, with a smirk that made my hands clench into fists. "These things happen, right? Besides, I hear you're doing pretty well at that accounting firm. You can probably afford a new car better than most people." The casualness of his dismissal, combined with everything I'd discovered about the planned deception and Grandma's missing money, pushed me beyond my breaking point. But before I could respond, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Thompson. The voice belonged to a man with a slight Southern accent. "This is attorney David Mitchell, calling on behalf of my client, Jake Patterson. We need to discuss a potential lawsuit regarding the defective vehicle that caused his recent accident and injuries." I stepped onto the front porch for privacy, but Jake followed me outside, his smirk widening as he listened to my side of the conversation. The lawyer explained that they were preparing to file suit for $200,000, claiming that mechanical problems with my Honda had caused the crash. Faulty brakes, he alleged, defective steering mechanisms, a pattern of maintenance neglect that had put innocent passengers at risk. When I hung up, Jake was practically glowing with satisfaction. "Told you that car had problems, Raymond. Now you're going to pay for putting Angela in the hospital. Maybe next time you'll take better care of your vehicles before lending them to family members." The implications hit me like a physical assault. Not only had I lost my car and remained responsible for the loan, but now I was facing a massive lawsuit based on completely fabricated claims. Jake wasn't just the victim of an accident. He was actively working to destroy my life while my own family watched in supportive silence. Monday morning arrived with a process server standing at my apartment door, legal documents clutched in his weathered hands like weapons designed to destroy everything I'd built. The lawsuit papers were thick enough to choke on, filled with legal language that transformed my Honda Civic into a death trap and Jake into an innocent victim of my alleged negligence. Attorney Tony Rodriguez listened patiently as I explained the situation in his downtown Denver office. His law degree hung behind a mahogany desk covered with case files, evidence of countless battles fought in courtrooms across the state. But even his experienced demeanor couldn't hide his surprise at the audacious nature of Jake's claims. "This is interesting," Tony said, adjusting his reading glasses as he flipped through the complaint. "Your cousin's attorney is alleging that you knowingly provided a defective vehicle with faulty brakes and steering problems. They're claiming $200,000 in damages for medical expenses, lost wages, and emotional trauma." But Jake was drunk. I protested, sliding the police report across the desk. Blood alcohol, 0.12. He had a suspended license. The accident was entirely his fault, not some mechanical failure. Tony nodded thoughtfully, making notes on a yellow legal pad. The drunk driving complicates their case significantly, but it doesn't make the lawsuit disappear. They're essentially claiming that even if Jake was impaired, the accident wouldn't have occurred without the alleged mechanical defects. It's a creative legal theory, but not impossible to pursue. The financial implications were staggering. My apartment rent was due in 2 weeks. The Honda loan payment would continue regardless of the car's condition. Now I faced potential attorney fees that could stretch into tens of thousands of dollars, even if we won the case decisively. Angela's medical condition became a central focus of their strategy. Hospital records showed broken ribs, internal bleeding, and potential long-term complications that could require months of rehabilitation. The attorneys painted a picture of a vibrant young woman whose future had been destroyed by my negligence and indifference to vehicle safety. But something didn't feel right about their medical claims. Angela had been released from the hospital after only 3 days despite allegedly suffering serious internal injuries. Her social media accounts, which I'd started monitoring obsessively, showed her attending parties and engaging in physical activities that seemed inconsistent with broken ribs and internal bleeding. Tony agreed to investigate Angela's background, and what he discovered changed everything about the case. She wasn't just Jake's girlfriend as I'd originally believed. Marriage records showed they'd been legally wed under different names in Nevada 6 months earlier. More troubling, her medical history revealed a pattern of accident-related injuries going back 5 years. This is her 4th major accident claim, Tony explained during our follow-up meeting, spreading insurance documents across his desk like a dealer shuffling marked cards. Each time she's claimed serious injuries that somehow heal completely without lasting effects. Each time the other driver has been found partially at fault for mechanical or maintenance issues. The pattern extended to Jake as well. His driving record, which we obtained through legal discovery, showed 3 previous accidents in different states. Each incident followed the same template. Jake would borrow or rent a vehicle, have an accident with Angela as a passenger, then claim the crash was caused by mechanical problems, rather than driver error. My family's support for Jake began making more sense when Tony uncovered the deeper connections. Financial records showed that my father had been sending money to Jake regularly for over 2 years. Bank statements revealed monthly transfers of $500 to $800, always labeled as family assistance or emergency loans. The emotional toll was devastating. My co-workers at the accounting firm began treating me differently after news of the lawsuit spread through the office. Some offered sympathy, but others seemed to view me as damaged goods, a liability who might not be around for important projects or promotions. Sarah, my girlfriend of 8 months, struggled with the constant stress and uncertainty. She'd initially been supportive, but as the legal bills mounted and my mood darkened, our relationship began deteriorating like fabric exposed to acid rain. "I don't know if I can handle this anymore, Raymond," she said, during what would be our final dinner together at the Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. "This whole situation with your family and the lawsuit, it's consuming your entire life. You're not the same person I fell in love with." Her departure felt like another piece of my old life crumbling away. The man who'd been excited about quarterly reports and weekend hiking trips had been replaced by someone who spent every evening researching legal precedents and calculating worst-case financial scenarios. Jake's family became increasingly aggressive as the lawsuit progressed. Uncle Martin called my office repeatedly demanding that I drop my insurance claim and accept responsibility for Angela's injuries. Aunt Carol sent threatening messages through social media claiming that I was destroying their family's reputation with false accusations about Jake's character. "Your cousin might never fully recover from this trauma," Carol wrote in a Facebook message that was screenshot and sent to Tony. "He trusted you with his life, and you betrayed that trust by giving him an unsafe vehicle. The least you can do is take responsibility for your mistakes instead of blaming the victim." But the most painful betrayal came from my own parents. Mom called less frequently, and when she did, the conversations felt strained and artificial. Dad stopped inviting me to Sunday dinners, claiming that my presence made everyone uncomfortable. They'd chosen sides in a conflict I'd never wanted to be part of. The breaking point came when I discovered that Jake and Angela had been living in my parents' basement throughout the entire legal process. I'd driven over to pick up some tools from Dad's garage and heard voices coming from downstairs. Through the basement window, I could see Jake playing video games on a large television while Angela painted her nails on a leather couch. They'd moved in 2 weeks after the accident, claiming they needed a place to recover from their trauma while pursuing the lawsuit. My parents had provided free housing meals and emotional support to the very people who were trying to destroy my life financially. When I confronted Dad about this arrangement, his response was swift and brutal. "Jake is family, Raymond. Family takes care of family, especially during difficult times. If you can't understand that basic principle, maybe you're not the son I thought I'd raised. The words cut deeper than any legal threat because they revealed how completely my parents had been manipulated. They genuinely believed Jake was the victim, and I was the selfish family member who refused to accept responsibility for his suffering. Tony's investigation continued uncovering disturbing details about Jake's past. Criminal background checks revealed arrests in 3 states for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. None of the charges had resulted in convictions, but the pattern suggested a level of criminal sophistication that made our situation feel less like family drama and more like organized crime. The turning point came when Tony received a call from an attorney in Oregon representing an elderly woman named Margaret Foster. She'd been victimized by someone matching Jake's description, losing over $30,000 in what appeared to be a long-lost grandson scam. The timeline matched perfectly with Jake's arrival in Colorado and his sudden integration into our family. "This isn't just about your car accident." Raymond Tony explained, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who'd seen too many victims destroyed by professional criminals. "Your cousin appears to be running a multi-state fraud operation targeting vulnerable families. The accident was probably planned from the beginning as a way to extract money through lawsuit settlements and insurance claims. The realization that my entire family had been targeted by professional criminals should have brought relief, but instead it made everything worse. If Jake was running elaborate scams, why had my parents fallen for it so completely? Why had they chosen to support him over their own son? Why had Uncle Martin and Aunt Carol become willing participants in what was clearly criminal behavior? As Tony filed motions to dismiss the lawsuit based on Jake's fraudulent background, I realized that the legal battle was only the beginning. Even if we won in court, my family relationships might never recover from the damage that had already been done. The trust between parents and child built over 28 years had been shattered by someone who targeted us specifically for our vulnerability and loyalty. Private investigator Lisa Chen presented her findings in Tony's office like a detective solving a murder case. Photographs, financial records, and background checks covered the conference table in carefully organized piles that painted a picture of deception spanning multiple decades. "Your cousin isn't really your cousin Raymond," Lisa announced, her voice carrying the weight of a revelation that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. "DNA analysis shows no biological relationship between Jake Patterson and anyone in your father's family tree." The implications hit me like ice water flooding my chest. If Jake wasn't related to us, then his integration into our family was entirely fraudulent. But that raised even more disturbing questions about how he'd gained such intimate knowledge of our family dynamics and vulnerabilities. Lisa spread out a timeline that stretched back 25 years, marked with dates and locations that formed a pattern of calculated manipulation. Jake had first contacted my father through social media 3 years ago, claiming to be the son of Robert's deceased brother, Tommy. The story was compelling because Uncle Tommy had indeed died in a military accident overseas, leaving behind questions about potential children from a brief relationship. But here's where it gets interesting. Lisa continued pointing to bank records that showed financial transfers dating back years before Jake's supposed contact. "Your father has been sending money to various people claiming to be Tommy's children for over a decade. Jake is just the latest in a series of con artists who've exploited your father's guilt about his brother's death." The psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. Jake had studied our family through social media, public records, and possibly surveillance to create a persona that would appeal specifically to my father's emotional vulnerabilities. He'd crafted stories about abandonment, financial hardship, and longing for family connection that were designed to bypass rational skepticism. Tony leaned forward, studying the documentation with the intensity of a prosecutor building a case. This explains why your parents were so defensive about Jake's behavior. They've been financially supporting what they believed was family for years. Admitting they were wrong would mean confronting the fact that they'd been systematically defrauded. But the deepest shock came when Lisa revealed the source of the money my parents had been sending. Detailed bank analysis showed transfers from multiple accounts, including substantial withdrawals from grandmother Betty's retirement savings. Over $40,000 had been stolen from an elderly woman living in their own home, used to fund an elaborate criminal operation. Your grandmother wasn't experiencing memory problems, Raymond Lisa explained with gentle sympathy. She was being gaslit by people she trusted. Every time she questioned missing money, your parents convinced her that she was confused or forgetful. They genuinely believed they were protecting her from unnecessary worry while helping family members in need. The cruelty of it made me physically sick. Grandma Betty had spent her final years doubting her own sanity, while the people she'd raised and trusted stole her life savings to give to a complete stranger. The betrayal wasn't just financial, but psychological, a form of elder abuse that had been happening under my nose. Uncle Martin and Aunt Carol's involvement became clearer through additional investigation. Financial records showed they'd been receiving money from the same accounts, smaller amounts, but consistent over time. Jake had convinced them that keeping quiet about family business was essential for protecting everyone involved. We thought we were helping Robert work through his grief about Tommy. Aunt Carol admitted when confronted with the evidence during a recorded conversation Lisa had arranged. Jake seemed like such a sweet boy, and he knew so many details about the family history. How were we supposed to know he was lying about everything? The manipulation extended beyond financial fraud into psychological warfare. Jake had deliberately created conflicts within the family to prevent us from comparing stories or questioning his narrative. He'd told my parents that I was jealous of his relationship with them. He'd convinced Uncle Martin that I was selfish and materialistic. He'd portrayed himself as the victim of my unreasonable demands and expectations. Lisa's investigation revealed that Angela was not just Jake's accomplice, but his supervisor in a larger criminal organization. Background checks showed her real name was Jennifer Walsh, and she had outstanding warrants in 4 states for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges. The romantic relationship was entirely fabricated, a professional partnership designed to maximize their earning potential from each targeted family. They've been running this particular scam for 3 years, Lisa explained, showing me photographs of other families they'd victimized. The pattern is always the same. Jake infiltrates the family as a long-lost relative while Angela works as his girlfriend or fiancée. They create dramatic situations that require financial assistance, then disappear once they've extracted maximum value. The car accident had been their exit strategy designed to generate a final large payout through lawsuit settlements and insurance fraud before moving on to their next targets. My insurance company's refusal to pay had forced them to extend their stay longer than planned, creating opportunities for investigation that ultimately exposed their criminal operation. But the most devastating revelation came when Lisa showed me evidence of attempted murder in Oregon. A previous mark, an elderly man named Harold Foster, had died under suspicious circumstances after questioning large withdrawals from his bank account. Jake and Angela had been in the area at the time, posing as distant relatives who'd come to provide comfort during Harold's final illness. The death was ruled natural causes, but the timing was suspicious enough that Oregon authorities had reopened the investigation based on our evidence. Harold's nephew had been trying to track down the fake relatives who disappeared immediately after the funeral, taking with them over $50,000 in several family heirlooms. Your parents and extended family aren't just victims of fraud, Raymond said grimly. They're potential witnesses in a murder investigation. This has moved far beyond civil litigation into federal criminal territory. The weight of this knowledge was crushing. My family hadn't just made poor decisions or shown favoritism to a manipulative relative. They'd been systematically targeted and exploited by professional criminals who might have killed to protect their operation. Every family gathering, every conversation about loyalty and trust had been contaminated by the presence of people who viewed us as nothing more than financial resources to be exploited. I tried calling my parents to share this information, but they refused to speak with me. Amanda answered the phone at their house and told me that Dad had forbidden contact until I apologized for my behavior and dropped the lawsuit against Jake. They remained completely convinced that I was the problem, that my selfishness and legal threats were destroying family harmony. The isolation was complete. My girlfriend had left. My family had chosen sides against me. My financial situation was desperate due to legal fees and the ongoing car loan payments. Even vindication in court wouldn't restore the relationships and trust that had been destroyed by Jake's manipulation. Lisa's final piece of evidence was a recording device she'd planted in my parents' basement during a maintenance visit, disguised as pest control. The audio revealed Jake and Angela planning their next moves with clinical detachment that was chilling to hear. "The old man is getting suspicious about the money," Jake's voice said clearly. "We might need to accelerate the timeline and get out of here before he figures out too much. The lawsuit should generate enough cash for us to disappear permanently." Angela's response was even more disturbing. "If Raymond keeps pushing this investigation, we might need to consider more permanent solutions. Car accidents are so unpredictable, especially on mountain roads during winter weather." They were discussing murdering me with the same casual tone most people used to plan grocery shopping. The family that had raised me, fed me Sunday dinners, and taught me about loyalty and trust had welcomed killers into their home while casting me out for demanding basic honesty. The recording was enough to involve federal law enforcement, but it also meant that my life was in immediate danger. Jake and Angela knew their operation was compromised, and they'd already demonstrated willingness to commit murder to protect themselves. The car accident that had started this nightmare might have been practice for something much worse. Federal agent Sarah Martinez treated our case with the seriousness of a counterterrorism operation, which in many ways it was. Jake and Angela had been identified as part of a criminal network that had victimized over 40 families across 12 states, stealing an estimated $2 million over 5 years of operation. "We've been tracking this organization for 18 months, Agent Martinez explained during our first meeting at the Denver FBI field office. "Your situation provides the first real opportunity we've had to build a comprehensive case against the leadership structure." They've been very careful to avoid leaving evidence trails until now. The plan she outlined was audacious in its complexity. Rather than simply arresting Jake and Angela for their current crimes, the FBI wanted to use them to identify and capture the entire network. This meant allowing them to continue their operation while under surveillance, gathering evidence that could be used to prosecute dozens of criminals across multiple jurisdictions. My role would be crucial but dangerous. I would continue playing the part of the confused victim while secretly working with federal agents to document the criminal conspiracy. Hidden cameras and recording devices would capture conversations. Financial records would be traced to offshore accounts. Electronic communications would be monitored to identify other members of the criminal organization. The psychological toll was enormous. Every interaction with my family became a performance designed to gather evidence while protecting my cover. I had to pretend to be the selfish son who couldn't understand family loyalty while actually working to save them from professional killers who'd infiltrated their home. Tony's legal strategy shifted to support the federal investigation. We would continue fighting the civil lawsuit to maintain the appearance of normal legal proceedings while secretly cooperating with law enforcement to build criminal cases. The FBI provided resources for private investigators, expert witnesses, and technical surveillance that we could never have afforded independently. Lisa Chen's investigation took on new dimensions with federal support. Financial analysis revealed that Jake and Angela were part of a sophisticated money laundering operation that moved stolen funds through shell companies, offshore banks, and cryptocurrency exchanges. The car accident lawsuit was just one small piece of a much larger criminal enterprise. The breakthrough came when we discovered Jake's real identity through DNA analysis connected to previous arrests. His actual name was Marcus Webb, and he was wanted in connection with 12 separate fraud investigations across the western United States. Angela was actually Linda Reeves, a former nursing assistant who'd been fired for stealing medications from elderly patients. But the most shocking revelation was that they'd been planning to target my family for over a year before making contact. Social media monitoring, public records research, and possibly physical surveillance had provided them with detailed information about our financial situation, family dynamics, and psychological vulnerabilities. They knew about Dad's guilt regarding Uncle Tommy's death. They knew about Grandmother Betty's substantial retirement savings. They knew about my car payments and insurance coverage. The entire relationship had been based on criminal intelligence gathering designed to maximize the potential for financial exploitation. Agent Martinez showed me photographs of surveillance equipment found in Jake's previous residences, hidden cameras, listening devices, and computer hacking tools that would have allowed them to monitor our family's private communications and financial transactions. The level of invasive surveillance was typical of organized crime operations, not simple fraud schemes. We're dealing with professionals who view victims as business assets to be exploited systematically, she explained. Your family was selected specifically because they represented high-value targets with predictable psychological responses to manipulation. The federal investigation revealed connections to Russian organized crime networks that specialized in elder fraud and family manipulation schemes. Jake and Angela were low-level operatives in a sophisticated criminal organization that generated millions of dollars annually through targeted fraud operations. My participation in the federal investigation required careful coordination to avoid alerting the criminals to our surveillance efforts. I continued living my normal life while federal agents monitored my communications and movements. Hidden recording devices captured conversations with family members. Financial transactions were documented to trace stolen money. The emotional burden was devastating. I watched my parents continue supporting people who were planning to murder their son. I listened to Grandmother Betty apologize for being confused about her missing money. I attended family gatherings where criminals sat at our table planning additional crimes against us. Sarah had broken up with me months earlier, unable to handle the stress and uncertainty of the legal situation. But she called one evening in December, her voice carrying worry that touched something deep in my chest. Raymond, I've been thinking about everything that's happened, she said softly. I was selfish to abandon you when you needed support the most. If you're willing to try again, I'd like to be there for you through whatever comes next. Her return provided emotional stability during the most difficult phase of the investigation. She couldn't know about the federal operation, but her presence reminded me that life existed beyond the criminal conspiracy that had consumed my family. The FBI's technical surveillance revealed that Jake and Angela were planning to leave Colorado after one final score. They'd identified several high-value items in my parents' home, including antique jewelry, coin collections, and financial documents that could be used for identity theft. Their exit strategy involved staging another accident, this time targeting me directly. Intercepted communication showed them researching my daily routines, identifying locations where an accident could be arranged without witnesses, mountain roads I used for weekend hiking, parking garages near my office building, even the route I took to visit my parents on Sunday evenings. Agent Martinez decided it was time to spring the trap before they could escalate to attempted murder. The plan involved setting up a fake insurance settlement meeting where Jake and Angela would incriminate themselves on hidden cameras while trying to collect fraudulent money. I'll be wearing recording equipment during the meeting, I told Tony during our final preparation session. Every word they say will be documented as evidence for both the civil case and the federal criminal charges. But the most important aspect of the operation was protecting my family from the psychological trauma of learning how completely they'd been manipulated. The FBI wanted to arrest Jake and Angela without revealing the full extent of their criminal activities to people who'd been victimized by their presence in our home. "Your parents have suffered enough," Agent Martinez said with genuine sympathy. "They don't need to know about the murder plots or the international criminal connections. Let them believe this was just fraud that got out of hand." The investigation had revealed that my instincts about family loyalty and personal responsibility had been correct all along. Standing up to manipulation and demanding honesty hadn't been selfish behavior. It had been the only thing that prevented my family from becoming victims of even worse crimes. As we prepared for the final confrontation, I realized that the car accident had actually saved us. If I hadn't fought back against the initial fraud, Jake and Angela would have continued stealing from my family for years. Grandmother Betty might have lost everything. My parents could have been drawn into criminal activities as unwitting accomplices. Sometimes protecting people requires standing up to them when they can't protect themselves. Sometimes family loyalty means fighting against family members who've been compromised by criminal manipulation. Sometimes being called selfish is the price of preventing greater harm to people you love. The trap was set. Federal agents were positioned. Recording equipment was tested and ready. Tomorrow would bring either justice or disaster, depending on how well our carefully constructed plan worked against professional criminals who'd spent years perfecting their deadly craft. The Marriott Hotel conference room looked like any corporate meeting space, but federal agents had transformed it into the most sophisticated sting operation in Colorado law enforcement history. Hidden cameras occupied every angle. Microphones captured conversations from multiple positions. Recording equipment monitored by Agent Martinez's team operated from an adjoining suite. Jake arrived wearing his best attempt at professional clothing, a navy blazer that didn't quite fit his shoulders, khaki pants pressed sharp enough to cut paper, and a confident smile that suggested he'd done this many times before. Angela walked beside him in a black dress that was appropriate for the fictional insurance settlement, but somehow managed to look predatory at the same time. Attorney David Mitchell, the man who'd filed the original lawsuit, completed their trio with the polished appearance of someone who'd spent years turning fraud into billable hours. His leather briefcase probably contained carefully crafted documents designed to extract maximum money from what they believed was a desperate victim ready to settle. I sat across the mahogany conference table from people who'd spent months planning to destroy my life, my recording equipment, hidden beneath a business suit that felt like armor against their manipulation. Tony Rodriguez flanked me with legal documents that would become evidence in multiple criminal prosecutions. "Gentlemen," Mitchell began with practiced charm, "I believe we can resolve this unfortunate situation without the expense and uncertainty of a trial. My client has suffered significant injuries and emotional trauma, but he's willing to accept a reasonable settlement that acknowledges the mechanical defects in Mr. Thompson's vehicle." Jake nodded earnestly, his performance as the injured victim flawless, except for the predatory gleam in his eyes that no amount of acting could completely hide. "The accident changed my life forever, Raymond. Angela and I were just trying to have a romantic weekend when your car's brake failure nearly killed us both." His words were carefully chosen for maximum legal impact, designed to establish liability while avoiding direct admission of insurance fraud. But Jake couldn't resist embellishing the story with details that revealed his criminal sophistication. "We'd noticed the brakes felt squishy when we first picked up the car, but we trusted family," he continued. "Angela even mentioned that the steering seemed loose when we were driving through the mountain curves. If we'd known how dangerous that vehicle was, we never would have accepted it." Angela joined the performance with tears that appeared on cue, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated emotion. "The doctors say I might never fully recover from my internal injuries. The physical therapy is helping, but there could be permanent damage that won't show up for years." But Agent Martinez had prepared me for this moment with evidence that would expose every lie they'd constructed. I leaned forward with apparent concern, my voice carrying the defeated tone of someone ready to accept responsibility. I had no idea the car had problems, I said, watching Jake's face for signs that he believed he was winning. The mechanic told me everything was fine during the last inspection. But if there were mechanical issues that caused the accident, I want to make this right. Mitchell pounced on my apparent admission like a shark sensing blood in the water. We're prepared to settle for $150,000, he announced. That covers my client's medical expenses, lost wages, and compensation for pain and suffering. It's actually quite reasonable considering the permanent nature of his injuries. Jake couldn't help smiling at the prospect of such a large payout, but his expression shifted when I asked the question that would seal his fate. Before we finalize anything, I need to understand exactly what happened that night. Can you walk me through the sequence of events leading up to the accident? The request seemed innocent enough, but it was designed to get Jake talking about details that would contradict the official police report and reveal his criminal planning. Agent Martinez had coached me to ask specific questions that would prompt him to elaborate on his fabricated story. Jake launched into a detailed narrative that was clearly rehearsed, but contained critical inconsistencies. He described brake failure that supposedly occurred during a sharp mountain curve, but his timeline placed the alleged mechanical problem at a location where the police report showed normal skid marks from driver error. The steering wheel became completely unresponsive. He claimed his hands gesturing dramatically to illustrate the supposed mechanical failure. I tried everything to regain control, but the car just went into that spin like something was pulling it sideways. But then Jake made the mistake that would destroy his entire operation. In his enthusiasm to paint himself as the victim, he revealed knowledge that only the actual driver would possess during a drunk driving incident. Everything happened so fast after I realized the brakes weren't working. I remember thinking we were going to die when I saw that guardrail coming at us. The last thing I remembered before the car started rolling was how the alcohol made everything feel like slow motion. The words hung in the air like a confession written in fire. Jake had just admitted on federal recording equipment that he knew he was drunk while driving. More importantly, he'd revealed that the accident sequence was clear in his memory, contradicting months of claims about traumatic amnesia and confusion. Tony and I exchanged glances, but Jake was too caught up in his performance to notice that he'd just destroyed his own case. Angela, however, had gone very still beside him, her predatory instincts finally recognizing danger. Mitchell continued negotiating as if nothing had happened, but I could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. Professional attorneys developed instincts for when cases started falling apart, and something about Jake's detailed confession had triggered warning bells. The trap needed one more element to complete the evidence gathering. I pulled out my phone and pretended to check messages, then looked up with apparent surprise. Actually, before we sign anything, I should mention that my insurance company has been conducting their own investigation, I said casually. They've uncovered some interesting information about similar accidents you've been involved in, Jake. Something about a pattern of brake failure claims. That's when Angela made the calculation that revealed the true nature of their relationship. Without missing a beat, she turned to Jake with an expression of shock that would have been convincing if we didn't know it was an act. You never told me about other accidents, she said, her voice rising with apparent betrayal. Jake, what is he talking about? Have you been lying to me about our relationship? But Jake's response exposed the reality of their criminal partnership. Instead of defending himself or trying to explain, he grabbed Angela's arm with enough force to leave bruises and hissed words that the hidden microphones captured perfectly. Shut up and let me handle this. We've worked too hard to get this money to let some amateur investigation ruin everything now. Besides, it's not like they can prove anything about Oregon or Nevada. The mention of other states was exactly what Agent Martinez needed to connect Jake to the broader criminal investigation. But Angela wasn't finished with her performance. In a move that stunned everyone in the room, she pulled away from Jake and addressed me directly. Raymond, I think there's something you need to know about Jake's past, she said, her voice. carrying the calculated coldness of someone switching sides to save herself. He's not who he claims to be. His real name is Marcus Webb, and he's wanted in connection with several deaths in Oregon and California. The betrayal was breathtaking in its completeness. Angela proceeded to detail Jake's criminal activities with the precision of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. She revealed his real identity, described previous fraud operations, and even provided information about offshore bank accounts where stolen money had been hidden. Marcus killed Harold Foster in Oregon when the old man started asking too many questions about missing money. She continued her words recorded by equipment that would make them evidence in multiple murder investigations. He made it look like natural causes, but I have photographs and recordings that prove it was premeditated murder. Jake's face went through a series of transformations as he realized that his partner had been documenting his crimes as insurance against exactly this type of situation. The confident con artist disappeared, replaced by a cornered animal who understood that his entire operation had collapsed in a matter of minutes. "You lying bitch," he screamed, lunging across the table toward Angela, with enough violence to confirm every suspicion about his capacity for murder. "I should have killed you in Nevada when you started getting greedy about your cut of the money." That confession, captured on federal recording equipment with multiple witnesses present, was the final piece of evidence needed to connect Jake to a nationwide pattern of fraud and violence. Agent Martinez's team had everything they needed to dismantle the entire criminal network. Mitchell, realizing that his clients had just confessed to multiple felonies in front of recording equipment, made a desperate attempt to stop the proceedings. But it was too late. Federal agents burst through the conference room doors with weapons drawn, placing Jake and Angela under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and murder. The trap had worked perfectly. Two dangerous criminals were in custody. Evidence for prosecution had been gathered systematically. Most importantly, my family was finally safe from people who'd been planning to destroy us completely. As Jake was led away in handcuffs, he turned back toward me with hatred that revealed the depth of his criminal nature. "You have no idea what you've just done, Raymond. This organization has resources you can't imagine. You'll never be safe from us." But Agent Martinez stepped forward with a smile that suggested the federal investigation had been far more comprehensive than any of us had realized. "Actually, Marcus, we've been dismantling your organization for 2 years. You and Linda were the last major players we needed to arrest. Your offshore accounts have been frozen, your associates are in custody, and your criminal network no longer exists." The investigation was over. Justice had been served. The criminals who targeted my family were facing life in prison. But the real work of rebuilding relationships and trust was just beginning. 6 months after Jake's arrest, my parents' house felt different in ways that went beyond the obvious absence of criminals in the basement. The oppressive atmosphere of manipulation and lies had been replaced by something closer to genuine peace, though the healing process remained fragile and ongoing. Dad sat in his favorite recliner, holding a letter from the Federal Bureau of Investigation that officially commended our family for cooperation in the largest elder fraud prosecution in Colorado history. His hands trembled slightly as he read Agent Martinez's words, acknowledging that our case had led to the arrest of 43 criminals across 12 states. "Son, I owe you an apology. That's been a long time coming," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd confronted his own failures and found the courage to change. "I was so desperate to believe that Tommy's son had finally found us that I ignored every warning sign you tried to show me." The DNA evidence had been devastating for Dad's emotional stability. Learning that Tommy had never fathered any children, that Jake's entire story was fabricated, had forced him to confront 25 years of guilt and magical thinking about his brother's death. But therapy had helped him understand that grief could make intelligent people vulnerable to sophisticated manipulation. Mom's recovery had been even more complex because she'd been the primary facilitator of Jake's access to our family resources. Bank records showed that she'd withdrawn over $60,000 from various accounts to support what she believed was a struggling family member money that had actually funded a criminal operation targeting elderly victims across the country. I kept thinking about how lonely Jake seemed, how much he needed people who cared about him. She explained during one of our weekly family counseling sessions. I wanted so badly to help him feel loved and accepted that I ignored every reasonable question about his background and behavior. Grandmother Betty's recovery had been the most remarkable transformation in our family. Once the gaslighting stopped, and she realized that her memory problems had been artificially induced by people stealing her money and convincing her she was confused, her natural sharpness returned with stunning clarity. I knew something was wrong the whole time, she admitted with a smile that reminded me of her younger self. But when your own family tells you that you're imagining things, you start doubting everything you think you know. I'm just glad Raymond had the backbone to fight for the truth. The financial recovery had exceeded everyone's expectations. Federal asset forfeiture laws allowed the government to seize Jake's offshore accounts and distribute the recovered funds to victims. Our family received full restitution for everything that had been stolen, plus additional compensation for the psychological trauma of having criminals living in our home. More importantly, my insurance company settled their dispute with a payment that covered not only my car loan, but provided enough additional funds for a substantial down payment on a new vehicle. The Honda dealership, embarrassed by their vehicle being used in a fraud scheme, offered significant discounts on a replacement Civic that was actually better than my original car. Tony Rodriguez had become more than just my attorney during the long investigation and prosecution process. He'd helped me understand that standing up to family pressure wasn't selfishness, but self-preservation, especially when that family had been compromised by criminal manipulation. "You probably saved their lives, Raymond," he said during our final meeting as federal prosecutors prepared for Jake's trial. "If you hadn't fought back against the initial fraud, those criminals would have continued stealing from your family until there was nothing left. They might have escalated to physical violence to maintain control." The trial itself was a formality because Angela's betrayal had provided federal prosecutors with overwhelming evidence of Jake's criminal activities. Faced with potential death penalties for murder charges in multiple states, he accepted a plea deal that would keep him in federal prison for the rest of his life. Angela's cooperation had been motivated entirely by self-interest, but it led to the recovery of millions of dollars stolen from families across the country. She received a reduced sentence of 20 years in exchange for her testimony against the broader criminal network, though she would likely never be trusted by law enforcement or victims' families. Sarah and I had worked through the relationship challenges created by months of legal stress and family conflict. Her initial inability to handle the crisis had been replaced by respect for how I'd managed an impossible situation while protecting people who'd actively worked against me. "You could have walked away from your family when they chose Jake over you," she said, during a conversation that helped us both understand what we'd learned about loyalty and commitment. "Instead, you found a way to save them from themselves. That takes a special kind of strength and love." Our engagement announcement in the local newspaper included a brief mention that we'd met during a difficult family legal situation that had ultimately brought us closer together. We planned a wedding that would celebrate not just our relationship, but the healing that was possible after trauma and betrayal. Amanda had matured significantly during the crisis, learning that family loyalty sometimes required difficult choices and uncomfortable confrontations. She'd transferred to a better college using funds recovered from Jake's criminal activities, but more importantly, she'd developed critical thinking skills that would protect her from future manipulation. "I used to think you were being mean to Jake because you were jealous," she admitted during a conversation that marked our return to genuine sibling friendship. I didn't understand that you were actually trying to protect all of us from something none of us could see coming. Uncle Martin and Aunt Carol had struggled more with the revelation that they'd been supporting criminal activities. Their financial losses were smaller than ours, but their emotional recovery was complicated by guilt about encouraging my parents to trust Jake despite their own occasional suspicions. We should have listened to our instincts, Carol said during a family gathering that felt genuinely healing for the first time in years. There were so many little warning signs that we ignored because we wanted to believe we were helping family. My career had actually benefited from the skills I'd developed during the investigation and prosecution. The accounting firm promoted me to a senior position specializing in fraud prevention and financial crime investigation. My experience as a victim had given me insights into criminal behavior that made me valuable to clients dealing with similar situations. The Federal Bureau of Investigation offered me a consulting position, helping other families navigate complex fraud investigations. Agent Martinez had been impressed by my ability to maintain cover during the sting operation while gathering evidence that led to major prosecutions. We need people who understand both the financial and emotional aspects of family manipulation schemes, she explained during a lunch meeting where she outlined opportunities to work with federal task forces. Your experience could help prevent other families from going through what you endured. But the most meaningful transformation was in my relationship with my parents. The crisis had forced all of us to confront fundamental assumptions about trust, loyalty, and family responsibility. We'd emerged with a deeper understanding of each other and stronger bonds based on honesty rather than obligation. Sunday dinners resumed with new traditions that emphasized open communication and mutual respect. Dad no longer dismissed my concerns as selfishness. Mom no longer assumed that family status automatically conferred trust. We'd all learned that protecting people sometimes required saying difficult truths that they didn't want to hear. The legal proceedings concluded with a victim impact statement that I delivered at Jake's sentencing hearing. Looking directly at the man who'd tried to destroy my family, I explained how his manipulation had actually strengthened our relationships by forcing us to confront weaknesses that made us vulnerable to criminals. Your greatest mistake was underestimating the power of truth and genuine family love, I told him, as federal marshals prepared to escort him to a maximum security prison. You thought you could divide us permanently, but instead, you taught us how to protect each other more effectively. The Victim Compensation Fund, established with recovered criminal assets, would help hundreds of families rebuild their lives after similar fraud operations. Our case had become a template for prosecution strategies that would protect future victims from the kind of sophisticated manipulation we'd experienced. Grandmother Betty donated a portion of her recovered funds to elder abuse prevention programs, transforming her victimization into advocacy that would help other seniors avoid similar exploitation. Her experience became the foundation for educational materials used by law enforcement agencies across the country. The final resolution came when Sarah and I purchased a house in the same neighborhood where I'd grown up, close enough to my parents for regular contact, but independent enough to maintain the healthy boundaries we'd all learned were essential for functional family relationships. Our wedding took place in the backyard of my parents' house, with Grandmother Betty serving as the matriarch who'd seen our family through its darkest crisis and emerged stronger on the other side. Dad walked me through the garden where I'd played as a child, now understanding that protecting the people we love sometimes requires standing up to them when they can't protect themselves. The experience had taught me that personal integrity isn't selfishness, that demanding honesty isn't disloyalty, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their self-destructive behavior. True family loyalty means protecting each other from harm, even when that harm comes from people claiming to be family themselves. As Sarah and I exchanged vows, surrounded by people who'd learned to trust again after betrayal, I realized that my fight for justice had ultimately been a fight for the possibility of genuine love based on truth rather than manipulation. We'd all emerged from the crisis with a deeper understanding of what family really means, when it's built on honesty, respect, and mutual protection. The story of my parents lending my car to relatives without asking had become something much larger, a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even when everyone around you insists you're wrong. Sometimes protecting the people you love means fighting against them until they can see clearly enough to protect themselves. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who couldn't see they were being manipulated? Have you found the courage to fight for truth when everyone around you was living in denial? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because these experiences remind us that we're not alone in facing difficult family situations. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with your own experiences with family loyalty and difficult decisions. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength during impossible situations and protecting the people we love from those who would harm them. And share this video with anyone who might need encouragement to trust their instincts when something feels wrong in their family relationships. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to healing, from manipulation to truth, from family conflict to genuine love. Remember that standing up for what's right, especially within your own family, takes courage, but often leads to stronger relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. Until next time, trust your instincts and never stop fighting for the truth.